Hi everyone, and sorry for the delay in this video. I was away for a few days, but fear not, they'll be coming thick and fast now. Okay, this is Garry Kasparov against Lajos Portisch, which was played at the Nixig tournament in Montenegro in 1983. Portisch is a very strong Hungarian grandmaster who was a top-level player through the latter stage of the last century, and his positional style earned him the nickname the Hungarian Botvinnik. Kasparov had the white pieces and he opened with d4, after which came knight f6, c4, e6 and knight f3 in order to sidestep the main lines of the Nimzo-Indian. Thus Portisch went for the Queen's Indian defense instead with b6 and knight c3, which could have transposed into a Nimzo-Indian with bishop b4 now, but instead Portisch played bishop b7, which is the old main line in the Queen's Indian, the modern main line being bishop a6. So bishop b7 and a3, which is played in order to prevent bishop b4, and this variation is known as the Petrosian variation after Tigran Petrosian, and is also sometimes called the Petrosian-Kasparov variation because the latter used it a lot in his early career, as in this game. So then came some normal developing moves for this opening with d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, e3, knight takes c3 at the cost of 2 tempo because the knight has moved 3 times and taken a knight that's only moved once. But we're still in book here with b takes c3, bishop e7, bishop b5 check, c6, bishop d3, c5, Kasparov castled, knight c6, bishop b2, which looks like an odd move for the bishop because at the moment it's blocked in by its own pawns here, but it will be unleashed later when the game opens up. Rook c8, queen e2, black castled, and rook a81 from Kasparov, which is the last book move, and white has a very slight advantage, if any. So queen c7 and c4, which is the first move towards freeing up the scope of the dark squared bishop on b2 here, and ensures white a rapid kingside attack. And note here that black has traded off his knight that was on f6, which is a key defender in almost all openings. C takes d4 and e takes d4, which gives white the dynamic hanging pawns on c4 and d4, which we've seen in previous videos, and Kasparov is quick to utilize the key break associated with them after Portisch plays knight a5, which is trying to pressurize the pawn on c4 and might seem logical, but what's more important to consider is that the knight is doing very little else on the side of the board, and black has significantly decreased his central control. Maybe he was trying to provoke Kasparov, and he certainly succeeded in that, as Kasparov now left a c-pawn to be gobbled up by playing d5, which is the classic breakthrough move with hanging pawns. And then came e takes d5. If instead knight takes c4, then queen e4 favors white, because after the forced reply g6 because of the mate threats, comes bishop takes c4, queen takes c4 and queen e5. After which the only decent move for black is f6, and then comes queen takes e6 check, where white has regained his material and has the more favourable position after rook f7, rook c1, queen a6 and knight d4. So e takes d5, c takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now Kasparov not only gets the pawn back but opens up the black king side a bit with the tactical shot. Bishop takes h7 check, king takes h7 and rook takes d5. And here Portisch played king g8, which is the best move for him in a position. It's just getting his king a bit safer from any tactical ideas that Kasparov might have, or at least he must have thought so, but Kasparov was having none of that and played bishop takes g7, which is a sound sacrifice, especially considering the offside knight on a5. And Fritz assesses the game at this stage as still favouring white by just less than a pawn, meaning that black will be forced to give back the material in order to quell white's attack. So king takes g7 and knight e5, and the knight's on a strong central square, and it's only able to be there because the black knight has moved from c6, which weakened black's control of e5, and rook f d8. And if Portisch had gotten greedy here and played instead bishop takes a3, he would have paid for it dearly after the forcing line queen g4 check, king h8, queen h4 check, king g8, queen g5 check, king h8, queen f6 check, king h7, and knight d7, threatening rook h5, which is mate, and black is helpless against it. He can only prolong the game with the queen takes h2 check, king takes h2, and rook c5, but now comes queen f5 check, king h8, knight f6 with mate threats on h7. So king g7, but now queen g5 check, king h8, and queen h6 is mate. And that really demonstrates some of the threats in the position if black isn't careful about how he defends. So rook fd8, queen g4 check, and king f8, which is the only decent move for the king. And queen f5, which is threatening mate on f7, so Portisch played f6. Another way to defend was with bishop takes a3, defending f7 with the queen, but this would still favour white, albeit only slightly, after rook d7, rook takes d7, knight takes d7, and with best play, king e8, rook e1 check, bishop e7, and knight to f6 check. As I said, only slightly favours white. So, f6 anyway, and knight d7 check, and black is forced to give up the exchange in order to save the game with a rook takes d7. Anything else would lose. For example, if king g7, then rook e1 with a winning advantage for white. Best play continues, rook takes d7, queen g4 check, king f7, rook takes d7, knight c6, queen c4 check, king e8, rook e takes e7 check, knight takes e7, rook takes c7, and it's game over for black. So rook takes d7 is the best hope for black. Rook takes d7, and white's regained some of his material, and now he's only a pawn down, but he also has a passed h pawn and the initiative, because the black queen is going to have to move now, and also the black king is far from safety. And Fritz judges the game as completely equal here, but what he's unable to sense is the pressure that Portisch is under. Played out by two engines, it may well be equal. Black has a queenside pawn majority and two minor pieces against a rook, after all. But played between two humans, it's entirely different, and it's notoriously difficult for the player under pressure to hold his position, especially when playing against the man who would be world champion 2 years later. Portisch did manage to hold out for a while though. Here he played queen c5, which is a logical move for the queen that creates some harmony between the black pieces, all communicating with each other well, although the knight is still very badly placed. And then came queen h7, which applies even more pressure to black's position. Now the bishop is pinned due to the mate threat on f7. So rook c7, which is a logical move to threaten this dangerous rook on d7. So queen h8 check, king f7, which is the only move, rook d3, knight c4, and finally Portisch gets the knight to a decent square, and at the same time applies some pressure to the pawn on a3. And then rook fd1, and doubling the rooks and getting total control of the d-file definitely gives white a positional edge, and here the pressure proved too much, and Portisch blundered with knight e5, which looks alright on the surface with centralized pieces and an apparently consolidated position, but in fact it's completely losing. Better here was bishop d6, where it's completely equal, although black's king is still insecure and there are no direct but even though the king is insecure, there's no direct threats for the moment, and the d-file is not as effective for white because it's blocked by black's pieces. So knight e5, why is it such a mistake? Because of queen h7 check, and seemingly Portisch had underestimated the strength of this check. The only move to avoid mate is king e6, and now comes queen g8 check and king f5, which is again the only move to avoid either mate or losing a lot of material. If instead knight f7, then rook e1 check, queen e5, rook takes e5 check, king takes e5, queen g3 check, king e6, queen takes c7, bishop d6, queen c8 check, and king e7, and it's game over. So king f5, and here comes a surprising g4 check, and now it's a forced mate in 5 moves, no matter what black does. Portisch tried king f4. If instead knight takes g4, then comes rook f3 check, king e5, queen takes g4, and black is helpless to the threat of queen f5. To put up the most resistance, he can play queen d5, but it's mate in any case, because now we've got queen f5 check, king d6, and queen takes d5 as mate. So king f4, rook d4 check, king f3, and queen b3 check. And now Portisch resigned, seeing that there was no escape. Sample continuation goes queen c3, and queen d5 check, king e2, queen e4 check, queen e3, and queen takes e3 mate. So that's it, another great game from Garry Kasparov. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.